Alright, so today we're checking out the BETAFPV LiteRadio3. And yeah, this is a $60 budget radio, kind of targeting beginners, first-timers, not experienced pilots or long-range pilots. So I think, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be complaining about this radio because it's not for them. And yeah, it's definitely not for them. I'll talk about who this is really for later on in the video. But this is their third generation. I don't know. I don't think it's the third generation. It's like the fourth or fifth iteration of their radio. I did a video on the LiteRadio3 SE ExpressLRS edition previously. This is this one here. So I'll link that video in the description. But the new LiteRadio3 is a little bit bigger and quite a bit heavier. And I'll talk about all the changes here. They have the gimbal protectors on here. These are just like made of silicone or something like that. Pretty nice. The LiteRadio3 SE had the similar gimbal protectors, but they're connected, which I actually kind of liked. So, I think this new radio design is the gimbals are a little bit further apart. So this is going to be difficult to show on camera, but yeah, it's definitely wider. It's a wider radio, and the gimbals are a little bit further apart. In terms of the feel, yeah, it does. I don't know. It doesn't bother me either way. In terms of the distance, yeah, I think this is fine. In terms of the gimbals themselves, this radio has had a very notorious history with gimbals wearing out very quickly, and that's kind of part of the reason why the radio is so cheap. The price has gone up, I think, because they've sourced more expensive gimbals now. I think when the LiteRadio2 first came out, it was like $40 and went to like $45. I think the price has gone up even more. Also, regarding whether or not they're still going to sell the old version, I don't know that or not. I think it's currently still for sale. And by the way, they have upgraded the gimbals on the LiteRadio2 SE as well. If you purchase this in December, they're saying that it's got the new updated gimbals. And if you have the old an old generation of the LiteRadio2 and you want to update your gimbals or repair your gimbals, they do now sell the updated next generation gimbals for $6 each, I believe. So I'll link all that also in the description as well. But yeah, the new gimbal is a little bit different. It's got this like gunmetal color for the stick end versus this, basically this is like a pure silver color on the old stick end. But it looks pretty much the same. The top feels the same. But the gunmetal color here matches the lanyard hook. This is new. So a lot of people wanted the neck strap connector there so that they could hang it off their neck. And but yeah, in terms of the feel, these new gimbals do feel better. Not a whole lot better. The main complaint I had about the feel of the old gimbals is that the springs just felt kind of mushy, and I just didn't like the feel. These springs do feel a little bit better. Not Hall sensor gimbals or anything like these are still potentiometer gimbals. There's definitely way better gimbals out there, but for a $60 radio, okay, they're acceptable. Whether or not these are going to last, I have no idea. So this is obviously they've switched to a new vendor because of all the problems with the old gimbals wearing out very quickly. I've heard stories of them lasting, not even a week. Although I've had a few of them wear out on me, they've lasted a while, several months at least. Now, again, they're targeting beginners, they're probably thinking people aren't going to be using these for a lifetime. They're going to, learn how to fly and then move on to something a little bit higher end when they sort of figure out what they want in terms of radio, because that's going to be difficult to figure out when you're just starting out. Like, what kind of a radio do you really need, and what's going to fit your needs, and also what kind of feel you're going to like, because it's all personal. The way the radio is held in the hand, the weight, the way the gimbals feel, and it's very subjective, and so some people will love a radio to death swear by it, and then the next guy will be like, that's a complete piece of trash, I hate it. You get that quite a bit on the internets with the radios and the subjectivity of how the people like a certain radio or don't like radio. And whether or not these gimbals will last, I'll let you know in a few months. I'll try and use this, on a not a regular basis, but a frequent basis here and there. Yeah, obviously I like to travel with these small radios, as you've seen in a previous video. Very convenient to use. No switches to be broken off on this new one here. Although these small ones here on the BETAFPV, these don't break. Even I've dropped these before, and they're pretty solid. I don't like these because they can break, but these little short ones tend to not break. They've switched over to these new kind of switches. So this is sort of like a Tango 2 style switch with it's basically a button that gets locked in. So this is their 2-position switch here. And see on the shoulder here on the bottom, they're both 2-position switches here. And then this little rocker is a 3-position switch. This one I'm not too fond of. So you have a middle position and a top position. So the idea behind these kind of switches is that they're harder to break off. Well, they're not going to break off if you drop it. And they're less likely to be knocked by accident. And so if one of these is your arming switch, for example, sometimes people have brushed by the switch by accident and then disarmed by accident. Pretty hard to do that with one of these style where you have to actually press in again. So like, for example, this is the low position and then the in is the high position. You can reverse this, by the way, in the BETAFPV configurator if you want, but this is the default setup. So basically you have to press it and that'll lock it, and then you have to press it in again to unlock it. And so it's pretty unlikely for that to happen. So this is why I kind of like these style switches, and also they're flush and keeps it a nice low profile. You have your USB-C port here on the bottom, trainer ports, your setup button, and your bind button. These work the same way as in the previous generation. Basically turn on the radio, press the bind button, the radio goes into bind mode. It lasts, I think, about 10-15 seconds, and then you got to obviously put your receiver into bind mode, and then they'll connect up. But because this is the ExpressLRS edition, I use the binding phrase, and again, you have to use the BETAFPV configurator, just like with the LiteRadio 2 version in that video, to set up your binding phrase and also adjust your parameters for the ExpressLRS. So like your output power, telemetry ratio, etc., packet rate, those are all set in the BETAFPV configurator. Also, regarding the ExpressLRS firmware that's on here, it's still on the old version 1 series of firmware. I don't know when they're going to be updating that to version 2, and that's the whole controversy with BETAFPV and ExpressLRS, is they're kind of off doing their own little thing. And because the firmware for the radio is built in to the flash along with the ExpressLRS firmware, so it's kind of like the situation with the Betaflight SPI or the Betaflight firmware for the SPI receivers that are on the all-in-one flight controllers for ExpressLRS that are basically the, this is very confusing to me as well, but basically on certain flight controllers with an ExpressLRS receiver that's built in as an SPI receiver, that ExpressLRS firmware is baked into the Betaflight firmware. So updating those, although now there's like ways to do that through nightly builds and etc., which again I haven't made a video on that because it's just a whole totally convoluted process. You have to update your Betaflight to update your ExpressLRS receiver firmware. Likewise, on this radio, to update the ExpressLRS firmware on here, you have to update that along with the firmware for the radio itself. And so BETAFPV has forked off that code into their own LiteRadio3 or LiteRadio2 firmware, and the ExpressLRS code is baked into that. So when you flash the radio, it flashes both. So I don't know if they're gonna. I don't think that whole situation is going to ever get resolved, where it's going to be you're going to be able to flash and update the firmware for ExpressLRS in here for the transmitter part separately in the ExpressLRS configurator, just because that firmware is baked into the same firmware as the LiteRadio3 itself, the firmware that controls the radio. So I think pretty much if you're going to be getting this radio, you're just you're subject to BETAFPV and whatever they're going to do the updates. So again, with version 2, I don't know when that's going to be baked into the next version of the firmware for the radio. I'm assuming they're going to be working on that, and that should be happening at some point soon. But right now, it doesn't exist. So you're still on the version 1 firmware for this particular radio. All right, so let's get to the new feature here, this little module port in the back. It's a Nano module bay. And you can see it can take Nano modules. And obviously they're targeting their own modules here. So this is the 900 megahertz module. I suppose you could also use the 2.4 gigahertz as well. But this is all controlled via the BETAFPV configurator again, because this is not OpenTX. There's no Lewis script. So if you want to control your parameters here, you have to do it through the BETAFPV configurator. However, once you switch over, so basically in the default configuration, when you turn this on, the module bay doesn't get power. It's actually turned off. So you have to actually go into the BETAFPV configurator, turn off the internal module, and then turn on the external module, and then reboot. And then when you connect the next time, it'll detect what's in here. And this is the 915 megahertz module. It detected that, and then you'll see the options for this to control it. So you can change the output power, the telemetry ratio, and the packet rate, as well as do the binding and also the Wi-Fi update. You can do that via the configurator. Yeah, it's the only way you can do it, because obviously it's not OpenTX. And obviously you can update the firmware through the USB port on this one as well, USB-C here. So regarding whether or not this will work with TBS Crossfire Nano, this is my TBS Crossfire Nano module, it does not fit. So you can see here the way this is shaped and designed, these are not compatible. You can see they should be flush, and it's not going to go in there. So there's some verbiage on the product page about this module needing a certain shape. Basically, this shape, the shape of their own Nano module, but obviously this does not. So I'm not sure if they're referring to another version of this module, which I'm not sure if it exists or not. It's possible. I don't know. This is the only one that I know about. This is one of the, I don't know. It's not the early version, but it's not a more recent version. I've had this for a while, probably more than a year. So if there's a newer version of this, let me know, and maybe I'll try and get that to see if it'll work with this. But again, I'm not sure if it's going to be able to detect that it's a Crossfire module in there. And then can you change the parameters for this with the configurator? I don't know. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to connect it. So yeah, that's basically an unknown at this point. If you're wondering if it'll work with Crossfire, obviously it does the Crossfire protocol because that's what these Nano modules support. But whether or not it'll work with this particular TBS Crossfire Nano module, that I don't know. So I'm thinking, maybe like for this setup here, if you happen to like the radio on 2.4 gigahertz and you want to use a 900 megahertz module for longer range, I suppose you can get this BETAFPV module as well, up to, I think this goes up to 500 milliwatts, and do that. Although, 2.4 gigahertz is still pretty good, even though it's only 100 milliwatts on this one here. It's you're going to get more range, obviously, in 500 milliwatts and 900 megahertz. So, again, like the power, in terms of the power support, it supports up to 500 milliwatts on the external module. They've beefed up the battery in here. It's inside. It's a 2,000 milliamp hour battery. I don't know what the runtime is going to be on 500 milliwatts. That's not specified anywhere in the product page. I don't imagine it's going to be that much. It's a 2000 milliamp hour 1S battery, and if you're powering external 900 megahertz module at 500 milliwatts, it's probably not going to last too long. Plus, the amount of power that this is going to use is probably going to be more the further away you are or the further away you go. So that's how usually it works. If you're close and not flying too far away, then it's probably you're going to have longer power available to you. But that, again, keep in mind, as I said, this is not, in my opinion, really for professionals. This is for beginners. And if you're doing, some sort of long range stuff or some serious work, this isn't the radio for you. This is for someone who's starting out, maybe just wants to see if FPV is, good for them or not, and then, sort of use it for a while, then move on to a different radio at some point in the future if they decide to stick with the hobby. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know if you guys have any questions down in the comments section. Yeah, let me know what you guys think of this new LiteRadio3. Obviously, a lot of limitations, but, for most of you guys that have been flying for a while, this isn't for you anyway. This is whether or not you think this is going to be for your friend that has not ever flown FPV and wants to get in the hobby and maybe is considering it, maybe doesn't want to spend a ton of money. If they're looking at something like Radiomaster TX16S at like $200 or something like that, but they're not willing to spend that kind of money. Maybe $60 is a little bit more up their alley, and that's the kind of pilot I think this is for. Someone that just is considering FPV but is not really interested in spending, over a certain amount of money for a radio. And this one here, might be right up their alley, might be at their price point for someone of that type of pilot. Otherwise, for most other people, I would say, look at the newer radios that are coming out now, like the T-Pro, the Zorro. There's a new one, the Commando 8 from iFlight. In terms of small form factor radios, they all look pretty decent. Of course, they are at higher price points, so keep that in mind. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Talk to you later.